Mr. Speaker, 3 years since Russia launched its vile assault on Ukraine.
3 years since Putin launched his so-called
специальной военной операции.
And Ukraine is still a war zone.
This school would have once been bustling with activity, but today it stands in ruins. You were upstairs.
Yeah.
You heard gunfire.
I heard the gunfire and I heard the shattering as well.
Air raid alert. Proceed to the nearest shelter.
So last night we had a drone attack.
Donald Trump's return to the White House has flipped the US's stance on its head.
It's a war that would have never happened if I was president. Putin would have never, ever done it. I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well.
The political situation is moving very quickly. Donald Trump described Ukraine's President Zelensky as a
Dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Gotta move fast.
The end to the war may be on the horizon, but the big question is, at what cost?
Morning, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. Now, that is a video that we've especially got on our YouTube channel, marking the 3rd anniversary of the Ukraine war and the first invasion by Russia. If you want to have a look at the full thing, please go to our YouTube channel to have a look at it. And if that doesn't put you off being a war reporter, I don't know what will. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. Today, I'm joined for another roundtable discussion away from my usual format with the Mirror's US editor, Chris Buckton, and the defence editor, Chris Hughes. Morning, guys. Thanks for joining us. So this is the People's Paper Review. Remember, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening podcast will just have to throw up your hands and ask yourself what the hell is going on. So let's try and answer that. What have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on Keir Starmer's announcement yesterday of the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War as Europe moves to rearm in the face of the Russian threat and American unwillingness to help. And more on that in a bit. First, I want to take us to events overnight in the US, where it was announced that Ukraine has agreed a deal to let the US extract rare minerals in return for, well, at the moment, who knows what. Chris Buckton, can you take us through a little bit? What do we know at this stage and what's been announced exactly?
Yeah, it's scant information at the moment. Obviously, Trump was pushing for a $500 billion deal. That's, I think it's like £395 billion he wanted back. The figures don't really add up when you listen to what Trump has been saying. He's been saying that he says that the US has spent $277 billion aiding Ukraine, and he said Europe had given $79 billion. The actual figures from the Kiel Institute were that the allocated amount from the EU was $109 billion, and the US had only put in 94. I say only, it's a huge amount, but $94 billion. Now, coming out of Washington, speaking to people last night, we don't think the deal is the $500 billion, the £394 billion that Trump wanted. And as regards the military backstop and the places the things that we're going to be put in place to defend the Ukraine, there is just no information on it. It remains to be seen. But Zelensky's off on Friday to sign the deal, and we'll probably learn more then.
Yeah, it sounds like there's still a few things behind out, but it seems to have been let go early, if you like, that there is something that will be signed, and there has been some kind of agreement. And Chris Hughes, like we just heard there, we're hearing that Zelensky is supposed to be in the US on Friday to sign whatever has yet to be agreed, some of which presumably we'll learn about in between now and then. How's this going to play for him at home in Ukraine? Is this going to be seen, as a moral collapse, giving in to Donald Trump's bullying, or has he actually pulled up a blinder in a way? I mean, this was a deal that he suggested originally. He offered some of his minerals to the US. He didn't want the 500 billion business and refused that. But this just looks like you've had a big negotiation in public. There's been a lot of name calling on both sides as well, isn't there? Dictator this and whatever the other. Now it seems like they've both had bit of a climb down.
Yeah, I mean, look, Susie, as we said last week, as I pointed out last week, Ukrainians are very resourceful, and the government has been extremely inventive about how to deal with various crises. This isn't the biggest one. Obviously, the biggest one was being actually invaded on a full scale attack 3 years ago, and I think Zelensky's back is slightly against the wall, and he's had to be creative and come up with some way of tying the US in for some years. And this might actually be it looks like a bit of a land or mineral grab by the US, but which it probably is. But if Trump is being seduced into committing US resources to eventually protecting whatever mineral deal this will become, then that might not be such a bad thing. And he may have stolen a march on the rest of Europe. Who knows? But it does look like a bit of US greed when a country like Ukraine is really under pressure. And the other complex factor we have to consider is this extraordinary relationship and enthusiasm that Trump has for Putin, who he still hasn't criticized for the invasion, and I think that might complicate this deal. There may have to be some guarantees that the US will, perhaps commit further to Ukraine.
Yeah, it does sound like there's been almost a change in position, but whether the public position was all some big strategy to start with, or whether they're really that clever is, I suppose, the thing we're talking about. But there's something we were talking about before we came on air about the way that Americans have provided this military assistance to Ukraine up till now, and that actually it's done something to actually support the US economy to help Ukraine by getting rid of some old weapons and building some new ones. And that's obviously going to have an economic impact in the future. If you stop doing that, the economy is going to suffer a bit.
Yeah, I mean, on the missile front, it is a huge win-win for the American economy. If they're offloading all these missiles to a foreign nation, then they have to restock, and the restocking of that comes from not only the industries that are building these missiles, but the supply industries around it, the employment cities, the cities that are involved in this manufacturing, they all benefit from this. So it's not exactly all pain and no gain for the Americans at all when they give missiles to a foreign country such as the Ukraine. What I'll say about the minerals deal is that it seems like there's no point signing a deal on critical minerals if Russia can then reinvade in a month's time after that point. There has to be something there that we're not hearing at the moment that we'll probably learn about on Friday, of some form of I wouldn't say a guarantee of a backstop, but it just seems nonsensical to sign a deal saying you're going to have X amount of billions of minerals and then not have any guarantees to their security. It doesn't seem. I just can't see Zelensky signing such a deal if that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Hughes, you've got various American outposts around the world, places where they've either got lots of business interests or military interests, like the Chagos Islands, like various places in the South China Sea, for example, where the US support, or whatever the US gains from it, is a deal. It comes in return for the fact that the American is going to park its tanks there. That's what the locals get out of it. So that's what he's going to have to do in Ukraine, isn't it?
You would think so, yeah. I mean, look at the UK. The UK is probably America's third biggest military airfield. We've got F-35B fighter jets here. We've got F-15s in Lakenheath and Marham, and various strategic bombers and tens of thousands of military personnel. It's gone down a lot, and we've done the same. We had 60,000 in Germany during the Cold War, and that was basically not to protect any kind of mineral or oil and gas interests. It was to protect our sovereign territory, to put a buffer zone there. It is complex. I think Trump has said he doesn't mind. Trump has suggested that he doesn't mind European troops being there. But what are we going to do? Act as mercenaries to look after America's mineral interests? Oh, it's oil and gas as well, by the way. And I think it excludes thank God, whatever Ukraine was making out of oil and gas beforehand. But that America will have it's looking at titanium and lithium and all of those things that are very much needed for the tech industry. But I think oil and gas will come into it as well. And that's going to be huge. And so, no, it would be very difficult to imagine that they are, as Chris said earlier, that there will need to be a military backstop. And will it be European? Will it be all NATO? Or will US troops be committed to that?
Yeah, and eventually, even if you put European troops in there to run some kind of a peace, you've got to have the Americans behind that going, no, you're not going to attack the French or the Italians or whoever is in the front line.
Well, that was very interesting as well, wasn't it? The fact that Trump specifically made the point in the press conference with Macron, where he said, I spoke to Putin, I specifically asked him, would he be okay with European peacekeepers? And he said, yes, he's up for that. He's agreeable to that. Well, overnight, Lavrov comes out and says, no, we're not doing that. We're not agreeable to that. And that would be the red line for us. So it also questions how close Trump is to Putin, and now he's lying about that as well, is he?
And how close we are to peace, I suppose, as well. Because if you don't have European troops manning a peace, who's left? To actually be there in there. Let's so Trump initially this rare earth deal, and I want to go a little bit detail about what Ukraine's resources are. Paul said, any of these resources in Russian controlled areas, and the answer is yes, loads. But at the moment, right, so Ukraine has got 19 million tons of reserves of graphite, which is used to make batteries in electric vehicles. Used to just be used to make pencils. Now it's batteries in electric vehicles. It's worth a lot more money. It's got a third of all Europe's lithium deposits, which are also used in rechargeable batteries, and it's significant other rare earths which are used in weapons, in turbines and electronics. Ukraine used to provide 7% of the world's titanium, but since that Russian invasion, Paul, resources worth about $350 billion have been seized by Putin, according to the Ukrainians. So a load of the natural resources is in that eastern chunk. Now, Chris Buckton, I suppose getting your hands on that for any nation is going to be a good idea in the 21st century. But this deal, it doesn't really say how Trump's going to protect that and those businesses. No. He's going to have to find a way through all that. And he's going to have to start doing the things he said he would never do. There's going to have to be some kind of promise of troops somewhere along the line. And it's not going to be the 500 billion. How's that going to play for him at home? All his big talk and bluster, which probably worked well with his base. Now it's going to look like, well, he's taken a smaller deal and is still helping our boys are still going to have to go to war.
Yeah, I mean, it'd still be seen as a win in the States for Trump and the Republican Party. They're now getting something back on a deal that was previously wasn't there. So, I mean, on that front, they'll be happy. There's a quid pro quo, as it were. And Trump will, whatever the deal is, if it's substantially less than the $500 billion he wanted, Trump will still present it as this is a huge win for the American economy. We're getting this money back that we spent. As far as a lot of Americans are concerned, particularly Republican and MAGA Republican, they don't want anything to do with the Ukraine. They don't want none of their tax. We said last week, didn't we? They didn't want any of their taxpayer money funding this war. They question why they're there. So the fact that they're now getting a little bit back, they'll see that as a huge win for Trump, and he'll be hailed as this great peacemaker and this great deal maker that he portrays himself to be.
Well, we have to sort of see, I suppose, how some of this is all going to pan back. What do you think, everybody? Do you think that we're a bit nearer peace now? Do you think that it's all chaotic and we're upside down now? We still don't know what we're doing. Steve says Trump isn't criticizing Putin yet, as he doesn't want to scupper any chance of ending the war. He's playing the man of Putin as he should. He's a deal maker. Starmer's doing the same with Trump. It's all a game. One needs to tread lightly. Steve is sort of taking the view that Trump is a brilliant strategist. This is all going his way. But he did come out right at the start, didn't he, Chris, saying that, Chris Hughes, saying that Putin had all the cards, that there weren't going to be any American troops on the ground, and that basically that just sort of giving away every possible thing to start with. We still haven't started those peace talks. And it seems now that he's going to have to be in a position where he's going to have to put American troops on the ground, and that actually Ukraine is going to hold quite a few cards if they've got a deal with America for their resources. So he's actually given some cards back to the other guy, hasn't he?
You would think so. And he keeps doing it. And this so-called superb deal maker is so unpredictable and difficult to read. he actually uses that as a bit of an advantage. I mean, we'll see what comes out of the Starmer and Zelensky meetings this week, but it is extraordinary so far just how much leeway he has given away to the Kremlin, specifically Vladimir Putin, because well, he hasn't openly criticized him. He's pressurized the UN to remove all criticism of the full-scale invasion, and I guess the tens of thousands of alleged war crimes committed by Russian troops in Ukraine. And yeah, he's given a lot away. It's almost like he's never actually been briefed by anyone who's been on the ground and told him about some of the vile atrocities that were committed by Russian troops and are still being committed there.
Yeah, and of course you've got this issue as well, which I was writing about on Monday, of thousands of Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped, seized, grabbed, forcibly adopted in Russia, and which has been subject of multiple legislation in the Russian Duma. So we all know that Putin was behind it, and no one seems to have talked about that to try and...
Coming back, Susie, to America, I cannot believe that Trump will put boots on the ground. He may put military hardware in the vicinity, but I can't see him actually putting... I think the American electorate, that would be a step too far for them. Trump's made a big thing about getting out of Afghanistan, getting out of Iraq, getting out of all these places, bringing the boys and the girls home. I would find it unfathomable that he would make the move. I mean, I'm not playing down the seriousness of what's going on in the Ukraine and what is going on in the Ukraine, but I think for the American voter, that might be a step too far. And I think for Putin as well, I think the fact that the Americans are on his border, I'm not sure that would wash as well.
No, right. I think was it Pete Hegseth, the new defense secretary? He's talked about bringing US troops out of Germany, where they've been since the end of the Second World War. I mean, that's the kind of place where they could put troops back in. It's away from the Russian border, but it's near enough that it would still be...
There's something else that might actually be more palatable to the US electorate, and they may not even know it, but there's there has been for 20 years, a burgeoning private security and intelligence gathering industry in America and in parts in Europe and in parts in Britain. And it could be that some of this stuff is farmed out to private companies to do. I'm talking about, imagine Blackwater, but with discipline, that kind of company that might be put in there. And there are many Brits who work for these companies, and Europeans, ex-special forces, Marines, paratroopers, who work all over the world in what's called the circuit. And it could be, we have to be careful what we say, because the D-Notice people have really clamped down on what we report from on the ground in Ukraine. But put it this way, there could well be a lot of private companies already operating in that region, or people who are perhaps used to serve and are not actually signed up anymore, if you know what I mean. So there are ways in which you could use resources without actually putting British or American uniforms on them.
Yeah, there's obviously a way through to some extent. Now, we had a few comments there. So Wes said this, you could see this was all going to, the moment all this started going next was when Putin handed Trump that Adidas football many years ago, the way all this was going to go. Eric thinks this is World War Part 4 coming our way. Leslie says Trump is desperate to get a deal, but trouble is, how is he going to spin it when it all goes pear-shaped? And let's just cycle back a little bit. So a week ago, you were both here talking about how, Trump's arbitrary refusal to keep supplying Ukraine with arms, pulling out of NATO, demanding 10 generations of Ukrainians pay him back for, their natural resources. And then we've got today's paper and this announcement by Starmer yesterday to ramp up defence spending here in the UK. We've got a little bit of video from the press conference. Here it is.
We must keep dialing up the economic pressure to get Putin to a point where he is ready not just to talk, but to make concessions. So today we're announcing the UK's largest packet of sanctions since the early days of the war, going after Russia's shadow fleet and going after companies in China and elsewhere who are sending military components. Later today, I will be discussing further steps with the G7, and I'm clear that the G7 should be ready to take on more risk including the oil price cap, sanctioning Russia's oil giants, and going after the banks that are enabling the evasion of sanction.
Okay, it's not my fault. That wasn't the press conference from yesterday about defence spending. That was about sanctions and a discussion that was with the European leaders earlier on. Chris Hughes, can you though take us through a bit about the announcement that was made yesterday about the defence spending, and that this, you know, it's all over the papers today that we're going to be spending more and that Keir Starmer's looking tough. This story on all government spending for years now has been cut, particularly to the military. How much money has been found? Where's it from? What's it going to be spent on?
Well, the government has been taken by surprise by Trump's outbursts, and Starmer has, in my view, quite brilliantly moved very, very quickly to do the numbers, removing a couple of percent off foreign aid and putting it into defence, increasing defence by 2.5 by 2027. It'll increase, in real terms, it'll increase defence spending by $6 billion a year. Very briefly, the problem with it is removing so much money from foreign aid isn't just about no longer helping poor people abroad. It's also about soft power, intelligence gathering, calling in favours. It's an immensely useful tool for Britain. So in the short term, we might not feel the effects of this. It's not just about stopping diseases from coming here and avoiding economic problems abroad, which create an influx of refugees. However, he had to do something, and he's done it. And so by 2027, I think it'll increase after that by 13-point-something billion. There's a certain amount of, I'm not sure if it's jiggery-pokery, but they have brought in some sort of increase for intelligence. So I don't know whether that has slightly boosted the figures. But anyway, at the same time, there are two problems with this. The British Army is expected to be reduced from 73,000 to 70,000 in the next year or so, and George Robertson is currently doing his. We do this every year, every time there's a new government, security and defence review, which won't be out for another 6 months, and has been superseded by this announcement that we're going to get that Britain's going to get even more money, so for its defence. So where are they going to spend it? I mean, you know, the UK military is in such a parlous state anyway. More troops, maybe. Ships will perhaps, more money will go into the Navy. We only have something just over 60 warships, including 2 immensely expensive aircraft carriers, which occasionally borrow US destroyers to escort them, and US supply ships, which occasionally are used to supply UK destroyers in the Red Sea and thereabouts when they're protecting Western shipping from the Houthis. So it is immensely complex, but Hegseth has already said this. He's from a very positive reaction from America, and Chris can talk a bit more about that perhaps. But it hasn't thus far been immensely controversial. I think it's been welcomed. And the question is it possible to say that British defence will be so much better if the British MOD doesn't improve the way it procures weapons? Weapons procurement is like a project. It has to be a projection of what you expect to need in the years to come, whilst reacting to immediate threats. The immediate threat is Russia. The long-term threat is China. And in the intelligence world, they often say, you say, who's the bigger threat? And they say, well, the way we look at it is Russia's the storm, China's climate change. I think we discussed this before. So we immediately have to deal with Russia in the next few years in the short term, and Russia in the long term. And hopefully that'll be I say deal with, but defend against any threat to British interests abroad.
That's a very interesting way of talking about it and thinking about it. It obviously has huge impact on things like Chagos Islands and the South China Sea and goodness knows what else. But I'm old enough to remember being a local newspaper defence reporter at the time of the last change of Labour government in '97, when they had a strategic defence review, and they announced they would no longer need, I think it was tanks, and they were going to invest in troop landing ships, because all the British military were going to do from that point on was going to be aid and rescuing people in disasters. And then Iraq happened. So thank you, Jeff Hume. Sorry, I'm still cross at him.
Incidentally, was that when was that?
That was after 97. It's after Blair.
Okay, yeah. So I think George Robertson first did a defence review in the late 80s, or something like that.
Yeah. Every time they do it, they're looking forward 5-10 years, and then something happens, and they go, "Oh."
But imagine if you've been doing it for 6 months, intensely studying all the various permutations, and then this happens, and you think, "Christ, we've got another £6 billion to play with. Why don't I just add a couple of things here and there?"
Yeah, tear it all up and start again. Now, Steve says, surely Putin will want to keep the territory he's already captured. The stuff with all the resources in, of course. The Ukrainians still want that back. What about the people living in those captured areas? Thank you, Steve, for getting us onto that point. So, interestingly, the Mirror has a piece inside today which shows how this might affect things on the ground. On page 9, two of our colleagues, Simon Murphy and photographer Rowan Griffiths, who you saw in that video at the start of today's broadcast, have been in eastern Ukraine, close to the front lines, to a village I'm not going to try to pronounce, which has been without electricity for 3 years, where the children have fled and only those who can't get elsewhere, like the grandmothers, the babushkas, they remain. And they've been supported there by a British charity called UK Med, which provides healthcare in remote communities like this in war-torn countries. Now, Chris Buckton, it is spending like this, if that is, come from government spending and aid and charities and, arm's length work, which doesn't stop you spending money on bullets. The war is still going on, but it stops you having to buy quite so many bullets. It changes the kind of things as a government maybe that you have to invest in. It affects immigration. It affects intelligence. If all this stuff that it's worth doing on the ground and to help people in places like that, where obviously as Steve was saying, Russia is going to be trying to seize territory and hold on to it and everything else. It's what government's always done. But I suppose, why do you think Keir Starmer's come to the decision, and Donald Trump too to some extent, that places like that can just go without and they don't need it as much as they need?
Trump on the first day in office on the 20th of January turned off the tap to foreign aid. Billions of dollars will stop going, not just to the Ukraine, but beyond that. But you can imagine the devastation that has. I think coming back to Keir, I think he had to go to Washington with something in his back pocket, and I think he did that in announcing the increase in GDP in the spending to 2.5%. I think it's a very clever move. Trump will say, he'll welcome that Hesketh, as you mentioned. He's already said it's an enduring, I think he said a strong step from an enduring partner. So it's been received well. It won't be enough for Trump. Trump will want to go 3, 5. He's talking about 5%. Right. The aid side of things, it's all right buying the bullets and the missiles. It's the actual, that hearts and minds on the ground, isn't it, of those people who are now living this life without electricity for 3 years. I mean, it's fantastic reporting that Simon and Rowan have done out there. It brings it to the fore what life is really like. I think we get a bit desensitized to what war is actually like. I mean, Chris can pay testament to that. He's been there dozens of times and seen the reality of what this aid does for these people, but not having it now, it probably just makes the mind more focused in why a deal needs to be done and done quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Something certainly needs to move, doesn't it? I mean, what do you think, everybody? Do you think that foreign aid is something that, to our viewers, do you think that foreign aid is something that can be cut? Do you think this is something that we can just move that into defence spending and there's not going to be any comeback from that? Do you think that's a reasonable thing to do to the people that are there? I mean, Chris Hughes, we seem to be in a world where this hard power is mattering far more than soft power now. That's what Defence Secretary John Healey was talking about on Radio 4 this morning, that, this is just this is the way the deal is. And it's all about being the big boy with the big stick. And that's it. Europe is talking about rearming. Germany's new chancellor is talking about continental nuclear protection from Britain and France for the rest of the continent, because now they can no longer rely on the US to provide that. Leslie says, we keep talking about the cost to us, but how much longer can Russia continue to fund the war? Russia's got a militarized economy, Leslie. Read my column before last about that. I think they kind of have to keep fighting the war, otherwise Russia collapses. But Chris, I mean, how does this feel like the start or the outbreak of peace to you? Or does it feel, am I being cynical and thinking, well, look, everyone's actually talking about having more money out of this and rearming and being more militaristic, aren't we? That doesn't feel like peace.
I think we're still climbing the hill. I think there are military commentators out there who are far better informed than me, who say we are already in the early stages of the grey area, the grey zone of World War III. It's not. I mean, it is trench warfare in eastern Ukraine. It does boil down to boots on the ground and people shooting each other, you know, in urban cities and in amongst the rubble. But the fact is that Russia has murdered people on British streets in recent history. It's had special forces people on the ground here. It's had illegals over here. Russia is constantly making incursions with its long-range strategic bombers who are acting as surveillance craft towards Scotland and having to be shooed off by British Typhoons.
Yeah, they did that last night, didn't they? They were going. England had to scramble its RAF, I think.
I missed that, but it's a weekly occurrence, and not only that, but there are submarines. Russian submarines are suspected of sniffing around the North and Irish seas. You know, constantly using the English Channel to I forget how it works now. Go to pass through on the way to, you know, Syria or elsewhere, and the, you know, this just constantly poking and jabbing and trying to test us for our reaction. This isn't just a psychological wind-up. It actually has a purpose. It tests the reaction and the strength of the arrangements between NATO defenses. So when they come up from the Med, the Spanish hand over to the French hand over to the Brits. So they are able to see just how efficiently, if it came to a proper conflict or you know, a standoff, how quickly NATO would react and what would Britain's part be in it, and how exposed we are, I suppose. Not only that, but absolutely critically, there are very, very important communications cables beneath the Irish Sea that go from Europe to Britain to America, and if they were cut, it would be disastrous for a few days. There are contingencies, but it affects the economy, the banking, communications, all of that key stuff that affects civil life. And so I think that the fact that we and the rest of Europe are waking up and committing to spending more money on defence it's not exactly an arms race, but we are looking at an escalation, an increase of tensions. There will be much more. I expect, as far as these naval standoffs between Russia and Britain, there will be more of that kind of brinkmanship. There will be, I'm pretty sure, some fairly scary moments in the next few years where, you know, everyone's thinking it's touch and go as to whether Russia's going to actually do something about it finally. And so, no, I don't think it's a move towards peace. I think the situation is escalating, and Britain is probably reacting appropriately.
So maybe it's not peace so much as a bit of a plateau in terms of where we are and where we're going to get.
We've reached there yet. I think it's just escalating still. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a temporary ledge on whatever cliff face we happen to be teaching.
Just maybe a little point about Friday, Susie, which is what is there? Obviously, Trump's now saying up Sakia's going with 2.5, but the one X factor that I'll put into this is this state visit that's being rumoured, where Trump's going to be invited to Balmoral. Trump loves the British royal family. He's an Anglophile. He loves Britain. His mother was Scottish, but he loves the British royal family. We saw him speak when he was president-elect to William in France, and now he came out gushing about how great a guy William was, this, that, and the other. And that, I think, would not put pressure on Trump, but it'll make him think about, you know, not only his relationship with Britain, but beyond that, the Ukraine as well. And I think that might play into the talks on Friday. We probably will be aware of those behind closed doors, but if a state visit in the offing for Trump, he loves the pomp and circumstance. It's right up his street. Last week he labelled himself a king. That could be a really interesting move on the part of the British government if that was the case, if he gets to meet the king and go from there.
Yeah, I'd love to see how the king's going to handle it as well. Like, who's the biggest king, mate? I've been around for longer. Oh, but at what point we unleash Kate Middleton? Because just having
the asset.
Let's just sum up a bit then where we are. So Chris Bupton, the war was stagnating. It was just dragging on. Ukraine was losing slowly. There was horrible, just grinding bloodshed going on. With all Trump's bluster and talk, he's actually managed to unblock the logjam, hasn't he? Things have been moving so quickly. We're getting announcements now about a mineral deal that hasn't been signed yet, and the guy going to Washington, who hasn't even announced he's going to Washington. He's changed the status quo, hasn't he? Has he moved the world to a safer place by somehow being more disruptive, or is that?
No, listen, for all the madness of Donald Trump, and there was a hell of a lot of madness. I always used to say about the elections, as soon as you're in 2016, the one benefit I think to the American electorate was that he got people who were interested in politics. And there's a generation now, whether they're on the left or the right, that is now got far bigger interest in the actions of America, not only domestically but internationally as well. And to give the guy credit, we might not agree with how he goes about things and the things that he says. I mean, some of the things are disgusting. But at the end of the day, people are now talking. Putin's at the table. Zelensky's at the table. Europe's now at the table. And that is because of Trump. You cannot deny that. So you've got to give him credit for that. Whether we get the outcome that we all hope and the deal that, the Ukraine probably deserves is another question. I think you've got to give him the raps for getting it going.
Yeah, for those on podcast, while Chris was talking there, we just saw Donald Trump dancing, for want of a better word, and it's blown my mind slightly. I mean, Chris, the Trump's strategy, if we want to call it that, but his ability just to put the wind up people, does that militarily? I mean, it frightens all the generals a bit, but does that actually work? Has that got us in a better place?
Which Chris?
Sorry, you, Chris.
Oh, right. Say it again, Susie. Sorry. Does Trump's belligerence? Yeah.
His disruptive sort of influence, his ability to just put the wind up people, that's kind of what's brought Zelensky and the others to the table and got everyone rushing to the White House. They're all frightened, right? They had the wind right up their skirts and they need to try and find a way to just try and control him and get things sorted. Has that militarily been beneficial to anybody from a defensive point of view?
I think politically it's definitely intimidating. I mean, and there are, I mean, let's not, half of the MOD is our civil servants, and our Defence Secretary John Healey, a very capable, steady person, is speaking regularly about. I mean, Trump is rarely out of people's mouths. He's constantly being commented on. Whether British generals are intimidated, if that's the question, I doubt it strongly. But it is very difficult for politicians like Trump and even British politicians who haven't served in the military to be critical of other people's military as well. I know that. I mean, the former Defence Secretary under the Tory government, Ben Wallace, was, I believe, respected. I mean, he'd been a captain in the British Army. I don't think John Healey has, but he's very, very calm, steady, and the other thing is we are getting behind the scenes briefings from I had one yesterday with very senior defence officials and in Britain, and everyone is being predictably incredibly careful about what's coming. Where's the money going to be spent? What is the Prime Minister going to give up to America? Nobody, we've got this security and defence review underway with led by George Robertson. It's months away before I mean, when that comes out, that will be enormous. That will be, are we going to get more tanks? Are we going to get more armored vehicles? More troops, better ships? Who knows? Helicopters, planes. All of that's going to come out. But obviously, as defence correspondents, and we're all trying to find out what that means and what steal a march on everyone else. But I think Trump, he's just so unpredictable and brash, inappropriate, all of those things. And I also agree with what Chris just said, that he's put it in the public spotlight. I hate to admit it because I can't stand the guy, but Trump has. He is right. Trump has put put the whole thing in the line. You know, we're all talking about him and it, and whether we're going to war and Russia, and you know, perhaps this wasn't so much spoken about before Trump came back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's there's an awful lot to worry about and unpack as the week goes on, I think. And you know, whatever Trump is saying, some of the stuff that he's doing isn't working. He's been ordered by a court back in the US to unfreeze that foreign aid spending that he had frozen. He's got issues at home with, you can't deport as many people as he wants to, but when you can go on the world stage and just say stuff, you can put the wind up people and get them to the table and make things happen. Perhaps he has more luck internationally than he does domestically. Now, thank you everyone for taking part. Thank you both Chris's for your time. I'm sure we'll see you again for one of these in a few weeks. Now, we're still waiting for peace talks to actually start, of course. And if the US is giving Ukraine the right to fight on, there may well yet be quite a bit more conflict. There were, of course, big attacks in Ukraine overnight and in the past few days. Now, we'll be back, I think, next Tuesday for the next edition of the News Agenda, hopefully with some of our parliamentary team. We will see you then. Until then, everybody, stay safe, take care, don't invade anywhere. Tatty bye.